Hello again, Christ Community Church. This is my video expansion of the meditation that's in the update newsletter going out on April 25th, 2020, in the middle of the coronavirus stay-at-home advisory. Today I want to reflect on something really not directly pandemic related and just an interesting thing that I learned in my journey about scripture and about life. And I recognized it first from reading a book about about how the Bible helps us solidify our identity. And this is one of the stories that was referred to in that book. This is the story found in 2 Samuel 12, and it's the story of Nathan rebuking David. Now, when you read this, you need to remember what has happened just before this, and that's the whole Bathsheba incident, where the army was out fighting, and David was in the comforts of his palace, which was highly unusual. In those days, the king needed to be near the army if the army was fighting, so there's something wrong there already that a Hebrew reader would recognize from that time. And then he commits adultery with Bathsheba, and then he arranges for Bathsheba's husband to be killed in battle because she reports to him that she's pregnant, and he's been away for a long time, and he goes through some convoluted efforts there. And so this is all sitting on David. This is in his conscience. This is one profoundly clear example of how a story can be a mirror, and I'll talk about that later. So David hears the prophet tell a story that has very similar aspects to it to what David had just done. He's taken a precious wife from a soldier he had power over. This is at its core about abuse of power, not being a proper king, and who protected his people, and arranged for the loyal soldier, to die in battle. When any of us do wicked things like that, if we have a conscience, it will gnaw at us. Depending on our upbringing and our cultural time, these inner churnings will be felt and expressed in different ways. Here's what David himself wrote about that angst in Psalm 32, verses 3 and 4. This is what was in David's heart when Nathan comes to tell him the story of the theft by a powerful man. David writes, "When I kept silent about my sin, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand, my conscience, was heavy on me. My strength was sapped as in the heat of summer." So that's going on for David, and then this happens. The Lord sent Nathan to David. When he came to him, he said, "There were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him." Now, a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over." That's what the Old Testament law said. "Because he did such a thing and had no pity." Then Nathan said to David, "You are the man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms." We don't often read this one in public worship. Creates questions in the kids. Wives? "I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if All this had been too little. I would have given you even more. Why do you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. See how that is the great crime in God's eyes? Not the adultery, so much as the murder. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now therefore the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. So that's what happened there when Nathan came to David. And after Nathan tells the story, David is livid. And we have room to ask, where does that anger come from? Especially if you just read this without realizing what comes before it. Who's he mad at, really? Well, he's mad at the man in the mirror in the story, which turns out to be himself, as Nathan points out. And only then does David no longer keep silent about his inner struggle. And right away, the graciousness of God is revealed. I would have given you more. Why did you take things to yourself, into your own hands? I love the tender tone of God's words to David through Nathan. It's like a wounded parent's voice. So this story is a small example of how stories, all stories, are mirrors for us. When I tell a story I thought was neutral, and someone has a strong reaction, ever since I learned this lesson from this passage in that book that I read, that most often is more about what they have seen in the mirror of the story than what I said. This has been a huge shaping influence on my life to see how this works, and it can be interesting to start watching for it yourself. And how all the stories and accounts of the Bible in their own way are holding up a mirror, and how actually everyone you meet holds up a mirror to you. And the mirror is asking, what are you seeing about yourself, Pete? Until we meet again, shalom and surrender.